You're listening to We're All Gonna Die Anyway with Jess Weiner. Don't worry. This is a joyful podcast about life, death, and everything in between. Hi, friends. I wanted to do this recap episode to celebrate and to honor and to walk through together what an incredible journey this has been to create and then launch and then share. We're All Gonna Die Anyway, a podcast about life, death, and everything in between. And I wanted a chance to process this because I think at the end, when you're done, creating something and making something in the world, there are all kinds of ways to measure results and measure success. And for me, when I was going into this whole season, I told my team that my goal was not anything really within, of course, I want the podcast to be successful and I want as many people as I can to hear it. But my goal wasn't about that. Initially, my goal was about, I want to have a conversation that I'm a little scared to have, that is not necessarily what people know me to be speaking about, that is deeply personal to me, and then therefore vulnerable to share publicly. That was my goal going into 2020. I've had this idea for about 2 years, ever since I experienced the passing of my friend Myra. I knew I wanted to have a public conversation about death. I knew I wanted to talk to people about their relationship to loss and grief and love and living. I knew I wanted to build a studio, which we did here in Los Angeles. And I knew I wanted my incredible husband, Felipe, to build these sound panels and to help me fill this space with good energy and love. And I did all of that. I knew that I wanted this to look beautiful. And so I hired my friends, Jeff and Adam from B Film, to be with me on this journey and record and edit and share all of this great work. And we've been working the whole year together. I knew that I needed smart producers and creators and content makers and, most importantly, good humans in the world. So I have Lauren Chavez-Myers on my team really co-piloting this with me this season and helping figure out the production management and the content expression, and Noelle Brimble on my team, and Becca Petrell, who helps me in all aspects of my work, and who she and her sister Destiny wrote the theme song to this show, which is incredible. I've been lucky and I've picked well for people to come on this journey with me. And I feel really blessed about what we've accomplished together. And then as this idea really started to become real and the studio was built and we go into 2020 and we start, reaching out to people, we kick off our season at the Brentwood School and their It's Our Turn conference, which is one of my favorite conferences in LA. It only happens every 2 years. It's a conference about women's empowerment, and it's designed and created by the young women at that school. I've been a part of it since its inception. I love, love, love it. This was the year it was happening. I was giving a keynote. So we brought the whole team, including the rest of my team from Talk to Jess, Hannah and Shannon and Katie, and we all went to the school and we shot our first episodes live. And you saw them with Iskra and Ibtihaj and Berna Anat. And, that was just so magical, actually. It was the first time we got to see it put into motion. And we had all these, expectations, I think, that started to emerge. And the expectation was, wow, we really can do something with this content. We can really get people to open up and share things that they don't normally share on podcasts. I mean, some podcasts are designed to be more promotional in nature, and people come on to share their book and their work. And that's beautiful. I've done those. I love those podcasts. I wanted mine to be a little less formal, a lot more improvisational. I wanted to hold space for just organic conversation to happen, which sometimes means we ran really long in these episodes because we didn't have them overly produced. And most of the time it meant that we could have incredible magic because I would talk to people I knew and I didn't know. And we would discover such similarities in how we were looking at the world, or maybe something that happened to us when we were children that really shaped our lives. So there was an opportunity to discover with this show. And that's what we did. So January, we're shooting at Brentwood. and the studio is getting developed and ready. Then we're shooting in the studio, and we had this incredible first canon of guests that came in: Damone Roberts and Jen Romolini and Kendra Smith and Michael Medico and Megan Baca and my husband, Felipe. We had incredible energy in this room, and we were like, yes, this is going to be where we're bringing in people all year. We're going to do all this cool, stuff together. And then we went on the road again. In March, I was hosting this incredible summit for Aerie, who's one of my really beloved clients. And we were hosting this incredible summit in Brooklyn. And we took the whole team again on the road. And we shot from New York. And then there you had Alex Jackson, my dear friend who flew up from Atlanta to come on the program. You had Tiff McPherce, who certainly lives up to her name. You had Taylor Truden, and you had all these incredible guests live and in person at this event. So we shot in LA, we shot in our studio, we shot on the road, we were in New York. And then right as we were in New York in the beginning of March, we were getting all of this, we'd all been having messages around COVID. I know I'll speak for myself. I had no idea what that was going to mean. I'd lived through and heard about the SARS virus and H1N1, and we were hearing about coronavirus and COVID-19, and we didn't really know what that meant, but we knew that right after we came home from March, we were all asked to stay inside. And in LA in particular, a very large city, deeply impacted right away from COVID-19, we had safer at home measures that had us all inside. So for a period of time, we were all like everybody else kind of wondering what's this going to mean for our regular life. And then certainly with regards to talking to people, it made it deeply difficult to get together in person. But I think we all sort of imagined at one point it would be over. Like we would get to the other side of it, because that's what we do. We have these hard things. And like Glennon Doyle says, we know we can do hard things, and we're going to do this. And then as the time went on and the cases increased and multiplied and around the world, and of course, in my, opinion, we have deeply inept national leadership around this issue. So we were having a ton of misinformation, no information, and argument about science. And meanwhile, a lot of people are dying. And I'm calling my team and we're having meetings, and I have great doubt about launching this program. At that point, we had shot enough episodes. We could have launched with what we had. And it just felt weird to me. I was scared. I was scared that people would think I was being opportunistic. It felt insensitive at the time as the death toll was rising for me to launch a podcast called We're All Gonna Die Anyway. It felt flippant, and I was scared that it was going to send the wrong message and not really showcase all of the love and the laughter and the inspiration that was coming from these conversations. So then we thought, well, maybe we'll expedite it. We'll put it out quickly, because then it seemed of the moment. It seemed, if it was, we went from one hand thinking it was insensitive to the other hand being like, oh no, we need this. People need a framework to talk about all that's happening. We should hurry up and we should make this happen. And then, like all things, I believe quite a bit in divine timing. In fact, if you recall from my episode with Felipe, it's one of the 7 values that we pledged to in our marriage together, in our marriage vows, was the trust in divine timing. And so we decided, okay, we're not going to rush it out there. Let's start to talk to people. Let's keep now having a conversation about what's happening. It's such a vibrant and important time to do that. So then we moved to Zoom and doing these interviews, obviously remote, even if we were in the same city. And my team and my staff all getting tested for COVID regularly. Us, when it was relatively, important and safe to do so, came back into our studio in very small numbers with proper precautions. And we started making, episodes. I started Zooming from the studio to guests. And then, that's like one track of my life professionally while I'm running, the rest of my business, consulting for brands and trying to figure out how to introduce this conversation in the world, and living in a pandemic and, feeling all of the things that everybody was feeling. I mean, I stopped exercising. I was emotionally eating. I was, depressed again. I was nervous. I was scared. I rode a roller coaster like we all did of what is this world? What is this life? Like, and I want to talk about making a good life. This doesn't feel like the good life. Like, how do I even talk about that in a time when people are sick and there's a lot of unknown? And something kept pulling me through, which I think is just a testament to maybe the inner work that I've really developed over the course of my life, therapy, now medication, reaching out for help when I need it. And so I was sorting through all of these feelings while I was doing everything else. And then I had my first big loss since Myra, really. And it came in the form of my cat, my firstborn, my baby girl, my little kitty named Cece, who was 9 years old. And at the end of April, got very, very sick very suddenly with cancer. And a cancer that we didn't see coming. It was a tumor in her intestines that one day ruptured. And that poor thing was in so much pain. And I rushed her to the hospital. She'd never been sick. I don't remember ever her being sick in her 9 years of living. And here she was fighting for her life. And she was in the hospital for about 12 days. She got to the other side of fighting sepsis and a lot of things. And then we knew how bad her cancer was. And she got out of the hospital and we decided to do chemo for her. And she couldn't really make it past the first, I think, 2 rounds of chemo. Her body was too weak. And ultimately she got into a lot of pain. So while she made it through the initial trauma of her cancer and the tumor rupturing, she wasn't strong enough to keep fighting, and nor did I want her to. And so I said goodbye to my first pet as an adult, somebody I raised from a kitten, somebody who I really do consider my cat daughter. And I really tapped into a deep and profound sadness that, of course, was not lost on me, that, like, here we are wanting to talk about death in the middle of this intense death season for so many of us in the world. And I was experiencing it. And it also felt weird, again, to think about, well, how do I talk about the loss of an animal when so many people are losing loved ones? And I was weighing and comparing my grief to others, which, by the way, is a big no-no. I've learned not to do that, because your grief is your grief, is your grief, is your grief. And I was sad. And I was, of course, feeling the loss and the depth of that loss all through, May and June. And then Felipe and I got this, idea to adopt 2 new kittens. We were missing having another cat in the house, and we went to go look for a kitten to give my other cat, Buzzy, a partner. And we found these 2 little sister cats, and we named them Sassy Lou and Noche Boo. And they were sweet, and they were 2 months old. And so we took them home, and we were loving having them in the house, although my older cat still didn't love that. But, we were beginning to repair our hearts a bit. And so that's now at about June. And around that time, team and I get together and we say, yeah, you know what? We've got great work. People have really bared their souls here. They've said incredible things that other people need to hear. Let's launch it. We're going to launch it in July. So there we go. We're putting things together. We're setting our schedule. We're wrapping up interviews. And COVID is getting worse and worse all around the world, not just in the United States. And at the end of June, right after we had adopted those 2 sweet little girl kitties, we get a really tough phone call from my husband's brother in Mexico City that his mom was not feeling well, and that his brother, who was 40 years old, named Jose, had contracted COVID. And we knew that that was going to be bad. We didn't have any idea what that meant. He went into the hospital. He was on an a ventilator for 5 or 6 days. I think he was in the hospital a total of 8 days. And while he was in the hospital, his mother, who he lived with, we knew was already sick. Then she developed COVID. Then she went into the hospital. And on July 1st, we got that devastating news that his mother had died from COVID-19 overnight, the first night she went into the hospital. And 5 days later, Felipe's brother, Jose, died from COVID as well. She was 72, he was 40. I don't even know if I now have the words to describe what that news feels like. I can remember the trauma of keeping the phone by the bed. I can remember the late night calls that would come in because there's a time difference between LA and Mexico City. I remember that we were just on high alert, it feels like, for this period of a couple of weeks, and then the floor fell out. And my husband lost his mother, his brother. He'd already lost his father, so now he was without parents and without a younger brother. And I just kept thinking, like, what a joke this is, that like we're wanting to have this conversation about death, and I never could have imagined that this would be what we would be experiencing. Of course, then, like, why not? People's family members die all the time, and none of us are exempt from COVID-19, especially if we don't take precautions to protect ourselves. And, we hear about the numbers all the time, but the numbers are people's family. They're real people. They're people named Jose and Rosario. They're people's mothers and brothers and lovers and friends. And I think, I was waiting to wake up. Maybe better word than joke is, like, it did feel like a nightmare. And I was definitely waiting for it to wake up. Like, when is this over? This feels terrible. And then because it's in the middle of a pandemic, we can't bury his family. We can't travel to Mexico to have a closing ritual. They cremate bodies, at least they did in Mexico City at the time, within 12 hours of death. So one minute his family is here, and then they're sick, and then they're gone. So this all happens at the beginning of July, and I'm thinking, I don't know, how I'm going to integrate this into the program. But one of the things that started to happen over time as we were healing and grieving and leaning on our friends and families and loved ones was that Felipe and I were talking more and more about some of the factors that we think influenced his brother Jose, who really didn't take precautions to protect himself from the COVID virus, because he was deeply, deeply susceptible. And this is just one of the reasons, but he was very susceptible to conspiracy theories on Facebook, and he was listening to and absorbing down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. And now, if you ever can get to watch a documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma, it's a really important documentary to watch in our time, because it's about the makers of some of the social media attributes that we have: the infinite scroll, the like button, the guys mostly who worked for Twitter and Pinterest and YouTube and Facebook, who made the addictive nature of these platforms possible, talk about how the system right now, especially in a time of global crisis, is sort of turning in on itself. And that everything from the election, which we've been debating about, did Russia hack the election? These folks in this documentary say, look, it's not so much that Russia hacked the election as that they learned how to use social media for some of the more nefarious things that you can use social media for, the way to spread propaganda and disinformation. And they're learning how to use, and they've already used those algorithms to impact the way people think and to impact and change their behavior. That's what they're going for. You don't have to overthrow a government at this moment with physical force. You can overthrow it with conspiracy. And they're doing that. They did that, and they're doing that, I believe. We'll go into that a whole other time, but I do believe that. And now that I've seen it in my family member who, started getting these videos, started hearing this information, COVID is a hoax, it's a government conspiracy, masks don't really help, they're trying to control you, the vaccine's going to implant a microchip in you to track you, and disputing science and fact and numbers. And what I learned from watching this documentary, and we just did that not too long ago, was that rabbit hole is designed purposefully to continue to kind of validate. The algorithm validates everything you watch, and it serves you up the next and the next and the next and the next. And so the brain begins to form a connection and relationship to what they think is truth, what we believe to be true, because we've seen so many of these pieces of information. While we were watching this documentary and reflecting and shocked and recognizing how addicted we are to this medium that could be quite powerful and also quite destructive, Felipe says to me, that's what killed my brother, I think. A big part of that was he was alone in his life and susceptible very much to the information that was served up to him. And, it's a part of that. It's a very complex situation. Of course, people have free will and they can choose to do certain things. And his brother did not take precaution. But there was this layer that we were seeing, which was there was such a divide, and there still is a divide about the impact of this virus. We're almost at 200,000 people at the time I'm recording this dead in the United States alone. And so this whole time has been this our deep dive into a place of grief and loss and sadness and anger and unfulfilled rage that we don't know what to do with, but we sit on every day, at this unnecessary loss, at these preventable losses in many cases. So Felipe, at some point one night, I think before we were going to bed, said to me, I think I want to talk about this on your show. Now, Felipe and I had already done a wonderful episode in the studio in the beginning during that first kickoff of guests and had a beautiful conversation. I'm hope that you heard it. It was about toxic masculinity and his experience with death, both of his dad and his cousin, and the way he grew up as a man in Mexico and what he thought he could be and who he thought he could be. And it was really powerful. I've heard some wonderful feedback from people about what they've learned through Felipe's story, how they've related and resonated with it. And when he was willing to talk, not too long, about a month after we lost his mother and his brother, I knew we wanted to do a special episode with him where I could give him this space. I mean, that's what this show has become in so many ways. It has served in ways I never would have imagined, as an outlet, certainly as a platform, but as a connective tool, a framework, if you will, to have a conversation that's sometimes very hard to have, because his loss isn't just about his loss. It's about our loss as a culture, our loss as a community, our loss as a world right now who's going through a real upheaval in looking at all of our systems, medical, political, police, education, everything. And so we brought Felipe into the studio here. We sat together. I hope you saw this episode. It was deeply personal for us to do. And I had concern about that too. I was like, dang, this is vulnerable. I am so tired of being vulnerable at this point. I'm tired of all of this loss, and it feels like too much. It just felt like too much. And yet I wanted to honor his desire, and I wanted to protect him, and I wanted to hold the space for him. So we did that special episode, and most of the summer had been marked and has been marked with how you pick up the pieces from losing two key family members and those that you never had a chance to really say goodbye to, even with your family, grieving and mourning with your family. So the disruption continued, and the show was launched, and the feedback was so heartening. And it wasn't for me about the likes and subscribes, although those are always appreciated. It was about the depth of conversation it was creating for people. It was about the, I guess aha moments is not the right word, but maybe it's the relief of actually hearing somebody say something that you wanted to say about loss, childhood loss, family loss. But outside of loss, we've been talking a lot about the good life, like making a life that you love based on your own terms. And what a weird time to be doing that in, but also what a great time. Everybody's in a reckoning right now, a personal reckoning. We're looking at what is considered essential, what is necessary, what is work. I mean, what are pants? What are bras? What are things that we haven't, we haven't really done some of the social traditional, things that we were all, brought up to do and to care about. And work is changing, and communication is changing, and family is changing. I mean, parents are becoming teachers out of necessity. Teachers are putting their lives at risk now, thinking of going back into the classroom. Colleges are rethinking what it actually means to be a part of a university or a college or a community environment. I mean, all of these systems are breaking. And so through that breaking comes a reimagining, right? Through that breaking comes a chance for us to reconsider what makes a life good. What do we want to make in the world? Who do we want to be in the world? More so than what do we want to make? What do you want to feel like? What's important to you? What do you value? How do you act upon those values? How do you build a life around those values versus just chasing everything that was told you need to chase? The degree, a partner, a family, a home, a car, a vacation, a whatever, a body type, like all these things that we've been marketed to and advertised to and brought up on believing would make us happy. Well, now a majority of us that actually follow the rules are staying inside and recognizing that we have to recreate home. Like, we've been asked to stay in our physical homes, but we've also been asked to go into our home bodies. And I can tell you personally, I have had a real struggle with this. I have not taken care of my physical body home over these last 6 months in the way that I normally would attend to my physical needs. I was, in a deep change of lifestyle for myself. I was, exercising very regularly, being very committed to understanding how to nurture and nourish my body. And I will not lie, the minute this stuff started happening, I immediately reached into my bag of tricks of things that would satiate and nurture and comfort me. And food is at the top of that. It always has been. I've written 2 books about it. It will be the work of my life to unpack, untangle, and make sense of a lot of systems that I grew up with that told me certain things about food and body. And one of the things that I do is I'm a user of food to satiate difficult feelings. And when I was in the throes of all of these difficult feelings, I turned to those behaviors and I stopped doing the behaviors that really helped me stay more mentally focused and healthy. So on top of all of this that I'm sharing with you, on top of putting out this beautiful podcast and running this incredible company and being of service to my clients and trying to be a good leader for my team and being a good partner for my husband, I lost me a little bit along the way. And these were obviously not things I would take to social media and talk about. They're rarely things that I posted because I was trying to, as we talked about in my conversation with Monique Coleman, which I appreciated, I was trying to live into like what I was feeling and understand it for myself first before I shared it with other people. But I want to share this with you because it comes a part of what it is to live a good life for me, which is how to be honest when things don't go the way I thought they were going to go. So no, I'm not in the physical and most of the time mental space that I wanted to be in. And that's okay. That really is okay. I am practicing some deep self-compassion for what it will take for me to reconfigure my good life and reincorporate the things that I can learn how to manage. And I've experienced with my family so much loss between Cece, my husband's family, my family. And then just, not too long ago, I lost one of those little kittens that we adopted. I lost Sassy Lou to a very fast, and I can't even believe this irony, version of the coronavirus for felines. It's fairly common that cats get the coronavirus and it lives dormant in their little bodies, and they usually develop the immune system to fight it off. But there's something that happens when they don't fight it off, when the virus mutates. It's called FIP. You can look it up, especially if you have cats. You should look it up if you don't know about it already. I didn't know about it. Have had cats a little later in my life with Cece. That was my first experience, but I didn't know about FIP. I didn't know what it does. I didn't know the impact. And basically what happens is when the virus mutates, it attacks the organs. And Sassy, who was 5 months old, got very sick as the virus mutated inside of her very little body, who hadn't yet developed the immune system to fight that off. And with FIP, it's somewhat being debated a little bit now, but there's really like almost 100% fatality rate. It is not a virus that one comes back from or gets treatment for. So we lost Sassy. We helped her transition out of this life at 5 months old. And I got to tell you, like at that point, I pray a lot. I read a lot about spiritual beliefs, and I have my own practices and rituals. But I was definitely done after this loss. I was like, this is enough. In one season, this is so many different kinds of pain that I wasn't imagining, on top of a pandemic, on top of a really rogue, authoritarian, on the verge government, in my opinion, and a lot of civil, unrest. In many cases, rightfully so, but in all cases, terrifying that we have so much brewing and so much happening. And I believe by the time you hear this, I think in the way that we're planning it, the election has not happened yet, will not have happened yet. And whatever the outcome is of that election, I think it's, for me, these are markers of places to remember throughout this year, of lessons and opportunities presented to us. Now, I'm not going to pretend at all to make sense of any of this loss for me personally or for other people, because I know people who have lost many family members, loved ones, husbands, children to this virus. I know people who have lost their businesses, who have had to lay off all their employees, who've gotten divorces, who've lost friendships and relationships, all during this time of volatile change. So I know that lots of us are hurting in so many different ways. And what I always do, I guess, in these moments is I come back to purpose and urgent living. I often think about Myra, and I certainly have talked to her quite a bit during this time about the pieces of advice that she gave me when I sat outside with her on the patio on one of her really good days fighting cancer, where I asked her what she thinks about knowing that she has a limited time on earth left. And, she told me those three things. She said the first one was that she didn't have any more time for toxic people, literally, even her family members, no more time to worry about what people thought about her. So I would think about that, and that would help me through these moments to prioritize, where do I need to focus? What do I need to do? Then she would talk about how she wished she would have taken more care of her body, and done that for herself, and relished the things that her body liked to do, like taste food that she loved, like a mango. I remember that as an example. She loved mangoes, couldn't eat it later on in her chemo, but that she missed the simple things of enjoying what her body does. And so I think about that a lot when I'm struggling with getting back to a system that will help me take care of my body in a different way, to show myself love and compassion and care to my body in the way that needs to be for me. I think about that a lot. But the thing I think about perhaps the most from Myra is when she said that she wishes she would have spent more time on herself, doing the things, learning about herself and doing the things that really mattered to her, versus following that script that she was given, the things that she thought would make her life successful. That I think about a lot right now, because I realize that really, what she meant by that, the way I take it, is that is the good life. All of it. Even the loss, maybe even especially the loss. The fact that you don't know you have a good life until you also know you can lose it. Until you lose somebody you love, until you lose a relationship, a job, a friendship, a part of yourself. The loss helps us with the gain. The loss helps us with the living. The loss helps us with the urgency. They're two parts of a very important piece. And so I'm, again, not going to pretend that I have this all figured out. And I don't want to tie it up in a bow. Some days it feels really clear for me what I'm intended to be learning about this. And some days I'm lost. But all the days I know that as long as I have breath in my body, as long as I have the faculty of my being able to live and move and express and connect in the world, I will be okay. And I've had to sit in more discomfort and more grief and more unknowing than is comfortable. It's really uncomfortable. And I just let that happen also, because I've learned that from the guests on this show. I think so much about Jen Romolini and what she said in our episode about just burning the old self down. Sometimes we get to do that purposefully and intentionally, and sometimes the world burns it down for you. And so I think I've had a little bit of both in this season of my life. So I think about that conversation. I think about Megan Baca and the conversation we had about living urgently and how we only get one life. And I think about Berna and how Berna would say, death is like a slow train coming her way and she's just going to have a good time until it gets there. I think a lot about these conversations. I think about Sarah Bareilles and I talking in the heart of the beginning of the uprisings around Black Lives Matter in this country, and her as this fantastic public person and artist talking about the need to admit that you're a mess and that things are falling apart. I think about, one of the most unexpected highlights from this show, I think, was the success with young people and this topic. Probably a sub theme of this podcast has been my relationship to people who are in the High School Musical franchise, which truly was unintentional about this season. I just thought about cool people I wanted to talk to and people that I knew had interesting stories. So you have Monique Coleman, who's from the original cast of High School Musical. You have the incredible Joe Serafini and Frankie Rodriguez, who are playing the first openly gay couple on a Disney Plus series for young people. And then you have Josh Bassett, who, when I interviewed Josh, who's the star of High School Musical, the series, which is this incredible re-envisioning from Tim Federle, who I also had on this show. When I was talking to Josh about being a young man and being, a young performer, and he's a very deeply thinking and spiritual person, that conversation lit up his fan base and the people who follow his work in such a way that I've never seen. And I've worked in Hollywood for a long time. I've seen, young celebrities relate to their fans. And there was something so genuinely open and honest about that conversation with Josh that it really delighted me to no end to see all these positive comments on YouTube, which, by the way, I never look at comments on YouTube because they're usually a dangerous place to be. But this was, for those of you out there who contributed to that positivity, kudos to you. You were brave and you were kind and you were clear and you got something from that conversation. And that was the purpose and the point, was that the conversation around death and life and living and the good life isn't just only for people in their middle age, only for people who are older in their life. It's for all of us at any stage and place in life. It's for all of us wondering where we fit in the world, wanting to be better, leave the world better than we found it, wanting to be of service, wanting to be of a creative solution, wanting to be a part of a community. I mean, this is what brings us together. This is what my friend Brene Brown talks a lot about, in that we are hardwired to belong. And this has been a weird-ass season of thinking about how to belong in the world that seems to be falling apart. And in my life personally, that was falling apart. I have found more love and laughter in doing this show than I ever thought was possible. I mean, I think I've even shown you silly highlight reels of all the laughter and the giggling that happened here. This was in no way a solemn affair. Our crew and staff were laughing. Our guests were laughing. There was joy in and amongst all of these conversations. And that maybe so much wasn't a surprise as it was just so delightful to experience. That even in the midst of somebody talking about their childhood and the pain that they experienced or a loss that really leveled them to their knees, at some point in that conversation, we had laughter. And all of these conversations had love. I think at the core end, love and death were all really the same theme this whole season. Because what I've learned in my own grief and what I've read a lot about and what people have shared back to me is that the grief that we feel when we lose something is proportionate to the love that we gave to that experience or to that person while they were here. So the more you grieve is really a beautiful sign of how deeply you loved. So for me, whether it was how much I learned to love a 5-month-old kitty or how much I deeply treasured my mother-in-law, the fact that I was able to continuously be open to loving and losing, that is what makes us vulnerable as human beings. That is really the good stuff and the good life. And all of us, this is what the other big awakening that I had during this podcast was the love that we had in our life came from multiple places. It wasn't always just our family of origin. In fact, we talked a lot about family on this program, not just losses we had in our families, but the way that we were raised. I somehow early on just got this idea that I wanted to ask people about their birth story because we were going to talk about death. And I thought we might start with birth and then end with death. And of course, sometimes we got to that question, sometimes we didn't. But for those that we got to, the birth stories were so interesting because a lot of the themes of somebody's birth, whether they were late, whether it was a difficult labor, whether there were complications, whether they were early, those all seemed to be interesting themes that would show up later in their life. But it really, more than anything, was a gateway into how somebody entered this world. And then we would talk about childhood, how you experienced this world as a child. What were the themes you heard? What were the stories you understood about yourself? Because that's what starts the foundation of a good life. That's what like kind of lays for us what we think is the good life. So if you grew up in a family that honored, working hard and bringing in a paycheck and buying certain things, then that was your value system growing up. If you, grew up in a family that, was all about being of service and volunteerism, then that was your version of a good life. And so, and it goes deeper than that. It goes into how we valued money and relationships and body and sobriety and all of it. And what I found from every single guest was we all had a childhood demon to wrestle with, all of us, no matter how great we feel our relationship is with our parents now, or how we need to be admitting that some of us grew up in less than ideal family situations or had less than ideal childhood experiences. To be able to share that as a foundational piece, to say, these were the things that I experienced in my childhood. This is what set me up on a certain path in life. The conversation's always circled back to, and now this is how I'm defining a good life for myself. This is what I'm learning to be valuable for me. Even 19-year-old Josh had that story to tell about what he thinks his good life is going to look like and what he wants it to look like. So whether we're living childhood actively and trying to understand it, like Josh and Joe and Frankie in a way, or Taylor and Chloe, Taylor Richardson and Chloe, who I talked to about youth and advocacy and social issues. And these are young women, 13 and 17 at the time of interview. And, they put a lot of adults to shame and as far as like their consciousness and their connection to the world. So there's no age limit, but whether you're a kid trying to understand your world, whether you're an adult having to heal a lot of trauma and a lot of pain to become a more functional adult, there was a big theme of reparenting in these conversations. And I wasn't as surprised about that actually, but again, I was happy that we unearthed it, because I think this is another third rail conversation that I want to have at some point in time, which is about mothering, fathering, learning to reparent yourself is something we talked about. So whether you had a childhood that gave you what you needed, or if you didn't, how do you as a functional adult take care of yourself so that you won't spill some of that dysfunction into your relationships, workplaces, family dynamics? That to me is the real work of self-discovery, the real foundational work of making a good life, is learning about you and learning how to give to yourself and nurture yourself and love yourself. And so I talked about that with Tim Federley. I talked about that with Michael Medico. Iskra Ibtihaj and I dug deep into that, about how to challenge some of the things that you grow up believing you can or can't do in the world. So the through line and themes of this season were so powerful in that all of it was about transformation, education, love, recommitting to things that we care about, not doing things perfectly, and accepting that there is always an opportunity to change and to grow. And even in that, changing and growing is a little death. We talked a lot about little deaths on this program. The fact that all of the changes we're making in our lives, all of the ways that we change and how we think, all of those are pieces of ourselves that we shed along the way. And I think one of the greatest things I've learned personally, and certainly through the guests this season, have been how to take some real honor in what you're learning right now, even in the hardest lessons. Like I will tell you, there have been many times, obviously, my husband and I have been in deep pain and crying and holding each other. And when we get to the other side of it, we'll say, God, we're getting stronger. Like, think about how we're thinking about things now. Think about what we've just proven we can live through. Think about what we're surviving. When we learn about ourselves, when we dare to learn about ourselves and we dare to grow, and grow authentically and grow vulnerably, you can't help but be surrounded by love. And the love big time is the one you create for yourself, regardless of what you weigh, what you wear, what you do for a living, who you're in a relationship with or not. It really was so beautifully put in Monique's interview, where she said that she really recognized one of the biggest things in her life was that she matters. She matters, period, full sentence. Not she matters because she's on TV, not she matters because she makes X number of dollars or has this kid or husband or girlfriend or partner. That in and of itself, I think, is something to be taken away right now, that we matter individually, and as individuals, especially in this time of which you're hearing this message, I would continue to implore that we wear masks and practice proper safety protocols around COVID. I don't think we're out of the woods yet. And I think for those of us who've lost people, we're incredibly diligent about it. I know if you haven't lost somebody, you think that it kind of lives off in the distance somewhere. So maybe you can hear that in my conversation today or in the conversations that I've had with Felipe on this program. But either way, we're all going to experience loss one way or another. Small deaths, big deaths, important deaths. It is a huge part of facing end of life. And that's what I appreciated a bit about having Michael Hebb on this program. He was one of the inspirations for me to even do this work once I read his book, Death Over Dinner. About Death Over Dinner, I was blown away by the idea that we could normalize this and we could talk about end of life in a way that could feel empowering and kind and graceful and loving. And so I guess my hope and my wish for all of this together is that you found a little piece of you in some of these guests. You heard something maybe you were hoping to hear, or something that shocked you into thinking differently, or opened your heart a little bit more, or created more compassion, both for yourself and for others. I hope you got to know me a little bit more too. I took this on as a journey to expose parts of me that I often keep hidden from the world. I have a certain professional path that I'm on that I'm very proud of and that I love. And there was a real personal desire for me to be seen in other ways, to share with you people like Tammy Ramsey and Andrea and Dave LaFrance and Catherine Zinger, of course, people who impacted my life, who are longtime friends, who know me and see me in different ways. And I wanted to share them with you, and I wanted to share me with you in a different way. I wanted you to see some of the mess. I didn't think it would be this messy, but I did want you to see some of the mess because I didn't want to do that alone. I didn't want to be alone in any of that anymore. And especially right now when we're in our homes and on our screens and looking at the world in a 2D way, and we forget what it feels like to hug the people we love, or to hug a stranger, or to be out in the world. I know we'll return to those moments again. But right now I'm turning that inward. And these conversations and the opportunity to be with you wherever you've listened to me, wherever you've watched this, is literally no less than the biggest honor and blessing. I'm so happy it was well received. I'd like to do more. I'd like to share more with you. I'd like to grow more with you. So if you wouldn't mind, I would love to hear from you, either in the comments here or on social media. You can email me at podcast@JessWeiner. You can certainly go onto social on Instagram or any of the platforms that I'm on. And tell me what else you want to talk about. Tell me, if you wouldn't mind, who lit you up this season. What do you want to see me talk more about? How can I be of service to these conversations? Do we want to continue to talk about urgent living and living the good life? And if so, where else can we dig in? Are there other topics that you're hoping to see me talk about? Maybe we have those in common too, and I can bring those to life. I've always been a storyteller. I've always cared about creatively cultivating conversations that change our culture. What I'm learning in this life as a cultural expert and a CEO of my own company is that at the end of the day, I am my medium. I am my platform. I am my art. I am my message. I am living, breathing, in progress human being. And while I have the resources and the opportunity to dig deep and to share these conversations, I will. I think it's foundational to being seen, to belonging, and most of all, to feeling and sharing that love. So with that, I say goodbye for now. I ask you for this feedback, and I thank you for going on this journey, for bearing witness to these stories, and for being brave enough to share your own, both on the show and in comments. A deep thank you to all of my guests, to my incredible crew and team here who brought this to life. And thank you so much for letting me in. And I'll see you soon. You've been listening to We're All Gonna Die Anyway with me, Jess Weiner. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And you can also watch this podcast by checking out my YouTube channel for filmed episodes, behind the scenes footage, and all other kinds of amazing video goodies. And of course, you can always visit me at jessweiner.com. We're All Gonna Die Anyway is exec produced by me and produced by Lauren Chavez Myers. Our episodes are recorded, filmed, and edited by Jeff Franklin and Adam Lippert of B Film. And our original amazing music is by Becca and Destiny Petrell. As always, I want to send a special thank you to the love of my life, the amor de mi vida, Felipe Lopez. And if you love this podcast, please make sure to tell your friends, subscribe, and leave a review at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, if there is something that stood out to you from today's episode, I want to hear about it. So if you want to share your own story, leave a comment, ask a question, please send me an email at podcast@jessweiner.com. I can't wait to hear from you. Bye, babies.